Good morning, everyone. How are you? We are here for the 2021 LIHTC Application Workshop. I'm Jeannie Redondo, the Rental Programs Administrator. Joining us today is Ruby Dillon Williams, who's our Assistant Deputy Director of Programs. I believe most of our staff is on, along with our Assistant Attorney General assigned to our office, Valerie Marciano and Karina Jeju. We're going to have 3 hours to go through what you normally will take a little bit longer, but at the same time, we are going to try to use the chat feature for any questions that people may have, which may make things go a little bit faster. Everyone will basically take a break every so often to go through the chats and look at the questions and answer the ones that we can answer at this time. If there's something that we can't answer during this forum, then we will go and put that aside and take care of that either through the clarifications or other appropriate means. Remember that this is how to be successful under the QAP. It is not a forum. We had forums already to discuss whether or not you agree with what is in the QAP. This is just for how to submit a successful application. If you have a question that's really lengthy, you might want to put it in writing and just send it to me via email, and then we'll include it in the clarifications. And you will be muted throughout the workshop. So the first thing we're going to do, for those of you who may not know how to submit an application, is we're going to go through the submittal process. So bond projects, so you know, they're accepted on a rolling basis. We expect to have about $21.9 million in low-income housing tax credits for the 9% round. That is including all adjustments that we have at this time. The IRS later will give us some population estimates that might change that a little bit, but for the most part, that's what we expect to have in this round to work with. Those applications are due on April 1st. And if you check our website about once a week, we do post clarifications to the qualified allocation plan. We don't submit an information bulletin every week. So just keep checking. It's right next to the QAP on the website. And then that way you'll be able to check in and see if anybody had any questions. And then we'll be accepting those clarification questions until noon on February 26th, 2021. That gives those of you who are really interested in submitting an early application the opportunity to have all the clarification questions at your disposal. So if you think you might have a question, start looking through the application materials and everything early rather than waiting till the last minute. So the application deadline is April 1st at 4 p.m. You want to submit early if you have any concerns regarding upload. We're not going to accept any late applications. As of this date, we are still expecting hard copies to come in. I know last year we didn't require the hard copies because of the pandemic. It's possible that if things get worse or something like that, that we'll put out an information bulletin and go back to the governor's office and make that change again. But we aren't able to do that. We aren't able to do that right now. So just plan on submitting your hard copies. You've got plenty of time. You've got till April 1st and to do that. You want to upload an entire copy of your application to the ADOH portal, which I'll show you how to do. If something is significant volume, like your market study or your appraisal, you can submit it as a separate bound item. You want to make sure that you label your files correctly. So we want the project name, the tab number, and a description of the tab. If it's not copied verbatim from the QAP, at least put down a brief description of what is in that tab so that if we need to go back and look at it, we know which one to look at. The tab numbers do change somewhat from year to year. You can use a bookmark or a PDF binder to show where each document is found in the tab. That can be very helpful as well at times. But if not, each tab should be one document. And also check your electronic copies for completeness. If there's any missing pages, we can't get those later for points. As you know, we're not allowed to contact people for anything related to scoring. So check over your application, make sure you checked all your boxes, you put in all the information that you're supposed to. If there's a form or something like that that's supposed to be uploaded, make sure that it's in your upload, that your scanner didn't skip a page or something. So for those of you who are not familiar with our website, it's housing.az.gov. And there's a bar across the top that tells you different kinds of things. The about, for example, is where you'd go for like public records requests and those kinds of things to join our mailing list if you are not already on our mailing list. But Housing Partners is where you go in order to upload your application. Most of the things are there. And then once you get on there, you'll click there and you go down to rental development. Yes, there will be a recording of the presentation. She's going to have to type it in.
Yes. So hang on just a second. Can you pause for a second?
Yeah, let me pause for a second. We're getting a chat saying that we're at capacity.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, we're having, we're evidently having a technical issue with the number of registrants available. So what we're going to do is we are going to post the slides online with a copy of the recording of the webinar so that you can download it and listen to it. And everyone who registered already will get a copy of, will get a certificate for attendance. So hopefully that will help that technical issue. Anyway, moving on. So once you're on to rental development, which is over here, then you move over to, there's an
Yeah, go there. Go ahead.
Okay. In addition, if you are in the same office as somebody and you can join together on the same portal to get into the webinar, that would be appreciated because that would open up some bandwidth for some other people to log on. All right, so moving on, ADOH website navigation. So you go to Housing Partners and then go down to Rental Development, and then off to the side, you'll see LIHTC forms. If you hit application materials, you'll be able to see all the application materials that are available. If you hit all that, it will show you the application materials, the QAP, et cetera. It's all the same page. And then you click view forms. And this is what shows up. So you have your application materials, the workshop. So we're going to update this with the 2021 workshop. And then to the right-hand side, we'll probably put the link for downloading the recording of the workshop. The plan is on the left, and then the clarifications are on the right, and then all the old reservations and allocations are listed down at the bottom. So that's what information is available on that page. In order to upload the electronic application, you want to go to the portals, and then from there, select ADOH document upload portals, and then go down to rental development portal. So they're in alphabetical order. It is not at the top. So just keep on going down till you get to rental development portal, and you'll see all the different types of submissions that we receive via portal. You fill in the information at the top, your email, your first name, et cetera. Whatever the project name is, put your project name in there. you type in 9% LIHTC application, and then you can drag your entire application into drag files here. You don't have to do them one at a time. As a matter of fact, it's helpful if you do them all at once, because then we know we've got your whole application. We don't have to go upload over and over and over again. It's easier for you. It's easier for us. We can take files that are up to 2 gigabytes. So it takes quite a bit of data. You should not have any problems logging on when putting your entire application into one upload. And then it'll look like this. You'll see all of the items and hit open. And then you'll see the items that are there in the part where it says items. They'll all be there. And then you can click on upload. And then you should get a visual that you're uploaded. And then you'll get a confirmation via email showing that you uploaded these materials. Put that confirmation email in the front of your application. So what we're going to do is we're going to be reviewing the applications for eligibility. So the section 2.5 has a number of different things that you need to be eligible to apply. Scoring, the threshold, which is whether or not you have a threshold of materials for the tab that's in there, and then underwriting. So in the eligibility area, we're looking for your application to be on time and the confirmation of the application upload email. We're looking for your complete application, including fees. So your entire application needs to be submitted electronically. We want a hard copy of certain items that are listed in section 2.4, such as the certification. Your certificate from this workshop, which will be arriving within 30 days. Compliance training certificate. There's a 2-day workshop, I think in February. I'm not sure if they're full. If you're not able to attend one of our workshops, there's a list of compliance trainers in the QAP. You can go to any one of those. You have to attend compliance training at least every 5 years. And the date that it's from is April 1st. So it has to be March 31st, 5 years ago is the most recent, the longest period of time. We need to have authorized signature. Your accounts with the department have to be current. So if you owe money on a loan, you want to pay that. You have to have satisfactory progress in terms of your moving forward of your other projects, and have your projects be in compliance. There is a local government acknowledgement that we send out once we get your application to get back whether it's in the consolidated plan and compliant with that. And then you can't have anything in 2.5H, which disqualifies you. So there's the scoring categories are pretty much the same this year as last year. We have developer experience for 10 points, smoke-free development for 2 points, service image location for 5 points, building efficiency for 15 points, up to 15 points, transit-oriented design for up to 15 points, occupancy preferences for 5 points, and then targeting low-income levels, 35 points max, historic preservation, application entity, waiver of qualified contract, and new construction. So those are the remaining point categories. We also have a separate set aside for tribal projects that have a different scoring category. So those are accountability, service image location, targeting low-income levels, tribal local government leverage, applicant entity, project-based rental assistance, waiver of qualified contract, and building efficiency. So the application content, what do we need to put in each tab? So I'm going to go through each tab as to what you need to put in, tab by tab. Form 0 is the application receipt form. So you want to put in your project name, your date, the name of the applicant entity, and check off that you're paying your $5,000 application fee. If we issue a notice of funds available for gap financing and it's being submitted with a tax credit application, you're going to want to put that payment of that gap application fee in there, and then of course your application. And then when you come to the door, we sign off on the application showing what it is, and then we give you a receipt. Otherwise, we send you a receipt back so that you can see it. I've just learned also, we are going to repeat the workshop next Friday. So if for some reason people in your office are not able to log in and they want a live workshop where they can ask questions during the workshop, we will actually repeat and reprieve this, this workshop. We will still post the recording of this workshop and we will post the slides on the web so that you have that. So everybody has the maximum ability to attend. So in front of tab 1, you want to put in your confirmation that you received your upload, your fee. And we want to see that in a hard copy. So you want, in tab 1, you're going to want to have your cover letter, your form 1, which is your project schedule. It should be realistic. It should show that you can finish within the 2-year time frame that's allotted under the tax credit code. Right now, we do not have any guidance from the IRS that anything beyond 2019 will have a place in service date extension. Obviously, if we do receive that, we will look at that time. The workshop certificate from this workshop or from next Friday, your compliance training certificate. And if you're requesting any waivers, you want to put them in behind at the end of tab 1. Waivers are available for things such as underwriting requirements. If you're not able to meet it for some reason and you want to support it with data, we can consider it. We do not waive anything with scoring. Your cover letter should also provide, if you have more than one award and you can only, like for example, if you submit 3 applications and you can only win 2, you can only win 1, then you want to put what your preferred order of award is in the event that both of them would have been funded. Okay, once the application is submitted and accepted, how often does it need to be renewed is the question that came up. Well, once the application is submitted for the 9% round and it's accepted, we only accept 1 copy. So it doesn't get renewed, but we do underwrite multiple times once you have an award. So we'll be underwriting again at the carryover, we'll underwrite again at the equity, and we'll underwrite again at final 8609s. But we don't renew 9% applications. You get 1 shot to turn them in. And then we evaluate the application that's submitted. We don't go back to people for things for scoring. Every once in a while, we may have some underwriting question that we can't possibly answer beforehand, but that would not have prevented the application from being funded. But other than that, we don't contact you during that period. I'm hoping that answers your question. So the Form 1 project schedule, there's a project name and date, who's the ownership entity, and then in the date, put the expected date that's going to happen. So when you're expecting to close on your site, your financing, et cetera, and then you can put other little comments onto the right-hand side, like what the source of funds might be, or if there's any other things that you wanted to tell us about that. And then these are the remaining portions of it all the way through the 8609 package. In tab 2, you want to put your self-score sheet. So your self-score sheet is telling us where you think you qualify for points. We look at the application to verify what you have in there and to see, but you don't necessarily get everything you claim, but that's telling us, hey, I think I score here. So it's something that you want to fill in and tell us what you think your score is. Those self-scores are posted on a list when we receive all the applications. The tribal set-aside has a separate Form 2 self-score sheet because, as you saw before, their scoring system's a little bit different. And then if you want to be considered under a set-aside, you fill out Form 2-1 set-aside election and sign that you want to be participate in one of the set-aside categories. You're allowed to select all of the set-aside categories for which you qualify. Things to remember: make sure that you check your math, in terms of figuring out how many points you got. Make sure it's authorized signature. Everything in tab 2 is electronic, so you don't have to worry about submitting a hard copy of that. And make sure you submit the correct one. So you don't want to take the tribal one if you're in the general pool or vice versa. And the points claimed has to be supported in your application. So the Form 2, there's 2 of them. You'll see one just says self-score sheet. That's for the general pool for everybody. And then the one that says tribal set aside only is for the tribes. The building efficiency is a little bit tricky. Well, I don't know if I'd call it tricky, but there's a little bit more filling in it. So you want to select your project type based upon the QAP definition. And then you want to fill in the residential square footage, the total project square footage, and then it will automatically calculate your building efficiency. So for example, this project's housing for older persons. They have 32,500 square feet. The total square footage is 50. And so their building efficiency ratio is 65. And in that application, that provided 10 points. Now this is an older one. I didn't redo this again this year, so it could have been a previous year's scoring. For service image location, this is a tribal example where you have a grocery store. How far are you from the grocery store? So you select within 5 miles, 10 or 15 miles, and then it will automatically determine your score for that item. For Form 2.1, we have a new option for a set aside within the balance of state set aside this year. So if the project's in a growing municipality or census designated place with no public bus transportation, then you can check that box and we will consider your application in the balance of state set aside. We'll consider it for all 3 projects in the state set aside, but this one will be considered in the one that's set aside for a growing municipality or census designated place without any public bus transportation. In addition to that, we have the supportive housing set aside, which is 1 project. The remaining, the balance of state, which is 2 more projects. So you just check where your project is, whether it's Northern Arizona, Western Arizona, Central Arizona, or Southeastern Arizona. The tribal set aside, you're going to check that and mark the name of the reservation. If you want to be considered in the nonprofit set aside, in Arizona, the nonprofit set aside is for projects that are totally nonprofit. It's not for people that paired up with a nonprofit and a for-profit partnership. It's totally nonprofit. And then the state special project set aside, which is for RAD and choice neighborhoods projects. But if there is none of those, then you want to be able to put in these others, whether the project's received a CHAP or whether it's in QCT, et cetera, so that we can consider those items when determining which project would win. Under tab 3, Form 3 is the main application form. You want to fill in that, check your details in there for consistency with the rest of your application. You want to have signature on the applicant certification indemnification, which just is an attachment to the Form 3 right afterwards. And then finally, what you want to do is put in your QCT or small DDA map right after that to show that you qualify as being in a QCT or a small DDA. The 2021s are out, so you should have no problems getting those from HUD at this time. And then everything's electronic except for the application certification and indemnification. So we have a question. There's no section 2.904 in the QAP. This section ends with paragraph 3. That would be a typo in the slide, yes. Okay, Form 3, you fill in the project name and address, city, state, zip, the county, the latitude. There's some help. Longitude is always a negative number. Latitude is always a positive number. I believe that the form has some warning bells that if it's not, so that we don't look and find the application in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Legislative district numbers, I'll show you how to find this and then check whether or not it's in a qualified census tract or it's in a rural area, those kinds of things. We have a question, will this training be able to be viewed later as a recording? The meeting said it was full, is not allowing my group in until now. Yes, you will be able to view it later as a recording, and we will post that on our website. In addition, we will reprieve the application workshop again next week so that if you don't want to just listen to a recording, that you'd also be able to attend next Friday. In addition, if you want to attend both, If your coworkers and colleagues were not able to attend because the application workshop was full, you are now able to log on. We were able to get Zoom to expand the number of participants. So please let them know that they could log on now, but it'll still be available on the web and the recording and next week. So this is how you go and get your legislative districts. They have a redistricting website that will give you that if you're from out of state. The state Senate and the state House should be the same district number. And then the congressional one will be different. There's, I think, 9 different congressional districts that you can look at. And so you'll be able to find out which one it is right up at the top. It'll tell you where you are. The QCT DDA website will tell you whether you're a QCT for that particular year. You want to put that map in showing that you're in a QCT. DDA is the same way. The QCT is like a purplish, and then the DDAs are more like a brown color on the maps. And this is the website where you can go get those. And it's in the QAP as well. And then this is what it looks like when you're done. So also when you're looking at the next section of the Form 3, which is this is a snippet of the Form 3 with financing, this area should mirror what you have in your tab 9 is all the different, I'm sorry, the tab 7, I think is what it is now for all your different sources. So your construction type, you're going to want to put that, this is the next section. So put on what kind of construction is, if it's new construction, if it's act demo and new construction, either new construction or act demo and new construction, get the new construction 1 point for new construction. Income levels, so you put in how many units are there. You fill in the unit mix table on the left-hand side. And then what's really kind of critical to remember, and people tend to overlook this, units set aside on the right-hand side. It's things that are going to be set aside in your land use restriction agreement. So if your project is for households with children as the occupancy preference, for example, and you put 100% of the units in there, we are going to assume that you are planning to set aside 100% of your units instead of the 40% that's required. So if you only want to put the number of units that are required in your land use restriction agreement so that it's open to other people who may want to live at your apartment complex, then you only want to put in there the number of households that are going to be with children versus the other. And then the other thing is, if you noted on the right-hand side of older persons and special populations, those are drop-down boxes so that you can show us whether it's 55 plus or 62 and over, or which special population that you want to set aside the units for. And in those cases, it should not be, the older persons can be 80%, it could be 100%. The special populations are generally no more than 25%. If you have a project that's coming back in for tax credits, for example, sometimes bond projects come in to re-syndicate, you want to put the year that it was allocated in the first year of your credit period in there. Minimum set aside in federal subsidy, just select the one that you are planning to do right now. So for example, if it's 40% of AMI at 60% of, 40% of the units at 60, which is by and large the most popular, just select that. If your syndicator already allowed you to do average income, then select that. That's what we're looking for, just one of those, so we know how to underwrite your project. If your project is a tax exempt bond project, then you're also going to want to check the little box saying if the project has tax exempt bonds. That would be a federal subsidy. Under your applicant entity, you can get up to 5 points for this. We do it by looking at your Form 3 and seeing whether the applicant is the same entity as the owner. It can't be a partner or a general partner or a member or any other part. It has to be the ownership entity and the applicant entity need to be the same. And then you need to support that in the, I think it's tab 4 or 5, where you put all your entity information. So in Form 3, you want to put that in applicant ownership entities, and then documentation in tabs 4 and 6 have to be consistent. So for example, here you see company Riverview Apartments LLC is the same as Riverview Apartments under the owner. That's what we're looking for. You may or may not have, you should have a tax ID number, but if you don't have one yet, you can leave that blank for now, but we will require that at carryover. The application, the entity needs to be formed. It needs to be duly formed. So you should have a tax ID number. If you don't have a DUNS number, you usually just need that if you have HUD financing. You want to put the state where the entity is formed and that it is formed if you're going to be claiming the applicant and the ownership entities as the same for points. And then down below, you put down the makeup of that particular entity, the tax ID numbers, et cetera, and the ownership percentage. In general, your general partner is going to be 0.1 or whatever it is that's minor, and whichever entity is going to be leaving and coming in, being replaced with your syndicator is going to be the 99.9. So when we're trying to figure out who we can contact with questions, because we're not going to talk to somebody else about your application that's not on your application, you want to put who's the principal contact, the person that we can get to that would be able to answer something within 24 hours. That would be your principal contact. It might not be the authorized signer or the principal. It might just be someone in your offices, the person that's your project manager versus the owner of the development corporation who is signing as the app on behalf of the applicant. And then in addition, you want to put down a secondary contact if we can't reach that person, so that way, if there's something going on, or if you have more than one person, for example, if you've got a consultant that you want to be able to answer questions for you, to work with you, then you can also put that person in there. The next section is development team information. So you want to put the name of the developer. If there's a co-developer in there, you want to put that in there. The developer fee needs to be consistent with the percentages that you've got outlined in other areas of your application. The identity of interest, whether or not there's an identity of interest. So there's a lot of developers that are vertically integrated. In those cases, you'd want to put yes for those different portions of the development team that are vertically integrated in one larger company, and then you're going to provide an identity of interest explanation behind Form 6, which is the one that explains who your development team is. The site information, how do you currently control the site? Is it a purchase contract, an option, whether you already own it through a deed or a lease? And then fill in what the cost of the land is, which should be consistent with the other sections of your application, the expiration of your contract, how much square footage you have in land. If there's any conditions to closing, you want to list them below. If it's part of a multi-phase project, like you're coming in again next year, or you came in last year, put yes, in which phase we're dealing with, and whether or not the site purchase is arm's length. So for example, if you bought a piece of land 10 years ago, and now you're going to be putting it into a project and you're going to sell the land to the project entity, then it would be a non-arm's length transaction, for example. And for your utilities are presently available at the site, you put down yes, otherwise explain which ones have to be brought to the site. So yeah, you shouldn't have more than one applicable under site control, but every once in a while, someone has an explanation of why. And those kinds of things. Okay. So your building acquisition information, if you're acquiring it from a related party, you want to put that down, how they're under control, their buildings versus the land. So the upper part was the land, this is the buildings. Does the project include any relocation or any displacement of tenants? If the answer to that is yes, it doesn't matter if they're commercial tenants or whether they're residential tenants, then you are required to have a relocation plan back at tab 20. And then you want to put the addresses of the buildings when they were purchased, etc. Okay, we got another question. If the project is multi-phase, do you want the cost for the entire piece of land, assuming it has not been subdivided, or just the cost for the portion of the phase being applied for? We just want the cost of the portion of the phase that's being applied for, and you want to break that down in your appraisal so that we can also verify that is the amount. You want the entire parcel, but then you want to make sure how much that portion is worth. The next phase is your project characteristics. So you want to select your project type at the top, which should be consistent with tab 12, which is your building efficiency. We want to also look at how much non-residential floor area space is in there, that the red arrows. And then we want to make sure that your maximum eligible basis is consistent from area to area. So on the right-hand side, the upper right-hand side, you'll see the total maximum allowable eligible basis. If that doesn't include the little bit extra for permanent supportive housing, you decide toggle whether it's permanent supportive housing or not. And then your actual total eligible basis comes in from tabs 8 through 11 on your Form 3. And you should have a pass within your maximum eligible basis. Otherwise, you need to go back and adjust that. Just be advised that until you fill in the entire Form 3, some of these things may look like, oh, it's not calculating properly. It is. It's just that you have to have everything. There are things that sometimes you're going to submit later. Like, for example, you may not have your maximum eligible, you may not have your eligible basis listed yet because you haven't gotten to that tab yet. So it's not going to show over here until after you've filled it in. And then so the little piece and from the tab 8 to 11 is down at the bottom of the slide. The total development cost is to the left, but the maximum eligible basis up right here on line 26, it's to the left in the shaded area. To the center, in this particular case, if it's a 9% application, it should equal. It should be the same or less than. So you have your maximum and it should be within that amount. The next section, so you understand which units are which. So the employee units are part of your residential floor area. So if you look at your 17 on the list, which is on page, I think, 6, then your project characteristics up on page 4, they should match with the number of units for each, like the yellow ones all match, and then the green ones all match from area to area in the Form 3. So the first left-hand part is like tab 4 of the Form 3. So you've got those to enter in. Then over on the bottom, it's the tab 6 of the Form 3. Down at the bottom where it's got the green area, that is the net residential floor area in the bottom of tab 6. And then those should also match and be consistent with the Form 12-1 that your architect puts together for building efficiency. So just kind of make sure that they all match. The type of units that you're going to build, whether it's multifamily, they'll all be multifamily residential rental, but whether it's a garden style or a duplex or detached single family or single room occupancy, those kinds of things, you would want to check those boxes if they're appropriate. The building information, you want to put how many residential buildings that you've got, and then how many non-residential buildings with no units. We give building identification numbers to all the residential buildings. We do not need to do a non-residential building identification number. So that's why those are split up. How many are 1, 2, and 3-story buildings? The unit and property amenities. And if you have an elevator, you want to put that over to the right. Unit and property amenities, these are what's going to be included in the land use restriction agreement. So everyone has to have a range, refrigerator, dishwasher, disposal, kitchen exhaust fan, microwave, air conditioning. They're required, they're identified in the LoRa. If there's something like, for example, if you're doing an old Section 8 project that is being rehabilitated and there's no room for a dishwasher in the kitchen because it was like teeny tiny and it would get rid of all of the space available for storage and stuff, that's something you would submit for a waiver request, and you put that behind tab 1. The items that are often in a project that are not required are ceiling fans, window coverings, washer and dryer appliances, and washer dryer hookups. So those kinds of things, or if you have some other kinds of things that's in the unit, you want to identify that there. If you have something that's, for example, market rate units, and you're going to give them a washer dryer appliance, but you're not going to do that for the low income units, that would be listed down at the bottom. You also want to make sure that your cover letter and your tab 12 and this area are all consistent. Smoke-free development. So we give 2 points for enforcing a no smoking policy. The ban includes electronic smoking. It means there's no smoking anywhere on site except a designated smoking area that's outdoors. You need to check the box, which we'll show you in a moment. If you need resources and technical support on how to do that, they have azsmokefreeliving.org. I checked that their website is still valid, so they should, a lot of times they can give you signage and things like that and help you to develop a policy that'll work. On the tab 4 of the Form 3, there's a little box, and it's right above these sections here, property management included in basis. It's right above that. So you want to check, actually you check right on the box, or you can check like anywhere in this area that says checking the box to the left, etc. So it should not be hard to get that box to check. Make sure that you don't accidentally uncheck it, because it will give you no points. Property amenities included in the basis. So there's a whole bunch of check boxes here. These are all the other things that are included in basis. One thing that we added this year is the free Wi-Fi service infrastructure. So if you're going to be providing free Wi-Fi service to their residents across the property, then you can include that, and that would be something that would be included in basis, and that it would be allowed to be put into the land use restriction agreement. Notably, it's not the operation of the Wi-Fi service, it's just the infrastructure that you need to put in there. You want to put down how many carports or garage or podium or any other kind of parking spaces are all listed here. They should total up what you have on your site plan in tab 12. Utility allowance calculations. We use the energy consumption model for everything that is not required by HUD to be done otherwise. And you put in, who's paying the utilities, who's the tenant, what they're paying for, and then usually the owner's paying for water, sewer, and trash, the amounts. Make sure that when you take this amount, like it's $69.70, that means that the utility allowance is $70. So if it's $69.01, it's $70. So make sure you do that, because it can lead to recapture of tax credits if you don't. And then you get the calculations from your resident rate or utility allowance. And they're the little green and white, that's an example from one of those, and it'll show you what those are. And then you want to put that on tab 6, I believe, under utility allowance. You want to put that amount. So if you see this one over here, it says 6907, and down here you put 70, even though the other two both say 6907. Annual operating costs. In the past, we required you to fill this in. This year, all of the administrative, operating, maintenance, and taxes and insurance is going to be auto-filled from page tab 14 of this form. So you won't have to fill that in anymore. It should automatically come through. That way you only have to put your expenses in once, and you don't have to look back and forth and say, oh, is this consistent with that? Or they're, sliced and diced a little bit differently. So we try to make that a little simpler for you this year. And you also want to check that against your documentation that you have in other areas of your application. Taxes and rental assistance. So real estate taxes should be consistent with tab 14. You do want to write here how you are calculating your real estate taxes. Again, rental assistance should be consistent with tab 22 documentation that you're providing, whether you have a HAP contract, et cetera, how many units are going to receive rental assistance, how long it's going to be for, et cetera. The unit mix, so the way this is set up, so you write in number of bedrooms, how many bathrooms, the AMI level, the special type, whether it's home or rental assistance or things like that. RA is rental assistance, LH is low home, HH is high home. Whatever source you're getting the rental assistance from, in this case it's project-based vouchers. How many units? This will automatically calculate the percentage of your total units. The resident floor area should be consistent with the information that you got in tab 12, saying how big is my unit. The maximum allowable rent should auto-populate right now. In later phases, once you get to carryover or equity or those others, it's possible that it will be updated. We don't know whether HUD will update the rents effective April 1st again. If they do, then we'll have to look at what the maximum rents are at that time. But for right now, we have the rents that are posted by HUD, and we'll work with those. And if they increase, that changes the underwriting a little bit. If you have any market rate subsidy or just here, for example, a lot of times things with HAP contracts may have a higher rent that they're able to achieve. And then the utility allowances are put in over to the right-hand side. And so it should deduct to have a net rent. And the rent limits, you can download those from our website. If you look under compliance, and then they have rent and income limits. You can't spend any more than $20 per unit per month. That's all we'll underwrite to for additional monthly income. These are things that you do want to put in there, and it'll be calculated into your pro forma. The percentage of gross rental income comes from the market study. You want to put that in there. Sources of financing are on page 7. So put in cells on page 5 seem to be locked. How can we unlock them? You do not need to unlock them because it's automatically calculating from form 14, but I will look at it and make sure that it's appropriately done. So I'll check and make sure if there are things that you need to fill in that are locked. I will check that. Loan housing tax credits, if you have historic tax credits, your construction loan, primary debt, all these things are whoever the lender name and contact name, it should be consistent with what you got on your form 6. The amount that's going to be drawn down during construction, the amount that's drawn down during the perm, if there's interest rate, amortization, et cetera. And then whether it's finance with federal, state, or local government funding, the commitment date that you're expecting to receive that. In other words, when did you get your award and all that down here. So make sure it's consistent with your financing documents in your Form 1. At the top of the development budget, there is a drop-down box whether Davis Bacon wages are included in your direct construction costs. If you're required to use Davis Bacon wages, you need to use that drop-down box and show us that yes, it is. Other things in here to notably is that your maximum allowable general requirements, et cetera, are going to show up on the left-hand side in the shaded boxes. You put yours in, they should be within that, or else it'll be something that we will make a deduction for. We won't allow it to be higher than those amounts that are the maximum allowable calculated for your project. The engineering fees, you want to check your CPA, whether or not a portion of that needs to be moved out. So for example, the grading plan might be tied to the land, soils reports tied to the land, things like that in terms of your eligible basis for those items. And then your HERS rater is also in there. Developers' overhead and fees are also automatically calculated, the maximum that you're allowed to have. And if you have more, then we would reduce it from there. Your amount that's in your eligible basis, it shouldn't include the negotiations for your land. It should be including the development side of everything. So talk to your CPA if you have any questions about that. Your project reserves, what you're allowed to put in there is lease up and operating. And anything that is a replacement reserve is something that is done during the course of operations. It's not, we don't capitalize replacement reserves. Okay, and then that just shows how the maximum eligible basis on the form page 4 was calculated at the bottom right-hand side, and how that is within the amounts under the eligible basis. So you've got the little red arrows showing you what should match. Okay, anything else? All right, this is the next is on page 12. Usually the uses of funds come out automatically. The sources of funds everything comes in here automatically. All you have to put in is the syndication rate and the investor ownership percentage. And it should calculate your tax credits. We often get questions about this saying, hey, it doesn't take everything from tab 7. No, It's not the deferred developer fee because that may end up getting changed by all of this. So just be aware that we checked that calculation from year to year and always found that it does calculate properly. And then it should generally be consistent with what's the maximum allowable. So you've got your gap up on Form 12, and then the maximum annual credits that could be potentially earned based upon eligible basis. Of course, we are required to give you the lesser of the two. So Form 3, tab 14, I've basically taken these and put them in color coding just so you can kind of see what goes with what. It's not color coded on this is just for illustration purposes, but it's not actually color coded like that on your actual form. So all the things that are administrative expenses are listed in red here, and they automatically will calculate to that cell that is now locked because it's coming from here. The utilities, all the utilities, including trash and snow removal, utilities for site-wide Wi-Fi service, water, sewer, gas, and electric, all go up into the box for utilities. On page 5, your operations like your pest control, repairs and maintenance, and those operation items, they'll automatically go into page 5 as well. And then all your insurance and your taxes go in there as well. So it should make it simpler for you this year, and you don't have to go back and forth trying to figure out whether they match. Okay, and then this continues down to the bottom to do the surplus cash flow to operating expense calculations. So if you have a surplus cash of $312,811 and you have these debt service, you have the annual replacement reserve contributions in there, you got your principal of your deferred developer fee, it's not the interest, and we take that over 15 years. Your investor asset management fee, that increases at 3% per year. You take that and put that in there, and then it brings you a below the line payments, which gives you your surplus cash flow, and then that's divided by your operating expenses. And over a 15-year period, so we have the average debt service coverage and we have the average expense ratio. So it's the one where the red is down at the bottom. That can't be any higher than 10%. Sometimes people have to defer fee in order to get there, but that can't be any greater than 10%. And then the debt service coverage ratio, in this particular example, I believe it's something where it was rising, but it can't be higher than 120 in year 15. If you start at a higher number, because sometimes people just start at a higher number and their ratios go down over time. Sometimes they start at a lower number and go up. Okay. So in tab 3, you want to fill in the certification. You want to just fill in you want to put in your signature block information. So you'll fill that in with your signature block to match what signature block you are going to be using to sign for. It's got to be signed in hard copy, original, notarized, and you place it behind the QCD DDA map. Any questions before we go on? Okay, if you have it, just please add it and we can go back. So moving on to legal formation, we're going to want to see an organizational chart, which usually is the owner applicant. In this particular case, it's an LLC, the member manager, usually it's a single purpose entity, the member who's going to be replaced by the syndicator, and then who the sole member is or the developer is of that entity. This is just a really simple example. Different people have different types of levels of complexity in all this, but this is a simple organizational chart. So we want to make sure that in this tab, we have all of the information that gets you to the principal sole member who's going to sign. So you're going to want to have the information on the applicant owner. You want to have that member manager entity information. You want to have that sole member information, and then that sole member information should show who is the person that's authorized to sign. You want to have the equity documents. You want to have all amendments for those, and then just provide each layer of that entity, tying that principal who's going to sign with that applicant owner. The articles of incorporation and the bylaws we want to have certificate of existence, and limited partnership agreement, the articles of organization, and your operating agreement, you have to demonstrate that the applicant is able to bind the owner. Your legal formation, you have to have duly formed legal entities. You have to be authorized to transact business in the state of Arizona. In order to apply, you need to have a duly formed legal entity and you need to have the authority to transact business in the state of Arizona. If you don't already have that, you need to get started earlier. I don't know if there's any delays going on at the Corporation Commission or the Secretary of State's office, but if you don't submit documents that are proper and then you need to go back and redo them, it all needs to be done so that you can put that in your application. It's not like, oh, I applied and then I'm going to get it later. So we had people that we were not able to accept their application in the past because they were not properly formed and authorized to transact business. So it's important to remember to allow enough time for that. You have to have a resolution in there from the entity specifying the name of the person who's like, you or me, who's authorized to execute documents on behalf of the project. So we want to have that highlighted where possible so that we can easily find who's empowered to execute those documents. And you can't authorize yourselves unless it's just you. You're the sole person that created. It's like we get some developers where they are everything and there is nobody else there. They don't have a board or anything like that. That would be the only instance when somebody could actually authorize themselves because there is no one else. But other than that, your board should authorize you to do this, or whoever your secretary is of the officers in that entity. If you're a public housing authority, provide your bylaws and the copy of the resolution or the ordinance from the government entity that authorized the formation of the public housing authority. Questions on board? Okay. Moving on, tab 5. If you're a nonprofit, that means the nonprofit is the developer. They're also the managing member and the GP or GP. They're not affiliated with a for-profit, like created solely for the purpose of getting into the nonprofit set aside. And we want to see a hard copy of the operating plan. So you want to put your Form 5, which is a certification to that effect. You want to put your 501c3 or 501c4 documentation, the officers and members, their experience, a letter of intent for the right of first refusal, operating plan. If there's more than one nonprofit involved, every once in a while we have 2 that are in a joint venture, the list of your board members and your sources of funds for your different programs and stuff that you operate. Tab 6, your development team. So there's several forms in here. One is on your development team and their experience. So you want to put down, so for example, in this development team experience, the applicant, the name, address, city, phone, etc., whether they're an individual person, corporation, limited partnership, etc., and then who controls it. And there's basically that information for each member of the development team. And then what you want to do is put your identities of interest behind Form 6 so that we can understand the relationships between the different members of the development team. If you need to provide additional sheets because there's other people providing services that are not listed on Form 6, for example, if you have more than one consultant, just put it on a separate sheet. So you can have up to 10 points for developer experience, projects placed in service, 1 through 5, just differing amount of points. I will advise anybody who hasn't applied before, generally people get full points in this area, so that if you don't already have that experience, you want to pair up with someone who does. And your project's claim for points must be tax credits or some other federal subsidized program. Like if you have projects that were developed with home, for example. So Form 6.1 is where you tell us what that experience is. You want to include all your affordable developments by units. If you use a tax credit, we want to know when it was allocated, when it was the last date of service was, last building was placed in service, whether it was done in multifamily or single family. Sometimes people have experience and it's a single family subdivision that was done with federal monies. Complete and sign the certification on the bottom, and certifications for foreclosures, removal of developer and fraud. Form 6.2 is basically your experience that we're going to be basically writing to the different states and verifying your experience. I don't like that. My internet connection is unstable. Okay. Hopefully it'll work. Complete each state, including Arizona, because we're going to give one to our compliance department and all the other states. All the forms 6.2 compiled should match your experience on 6.1. If it doesn't, put an explanation in there. For example, it was sold or something like that. Form 6.3 is all the projects that you're currently operating. It could include like a commercial building as well. It's not just housing. And we don't want to know, like if you're a developer and you're a principal developer, I don't want your single family home that you live in. We're not looking for a city hall if it's a local government, but we are looking for the real estate that you own and control. You may also request a waiver to provide the same information on an Excel sheet versus the actual form. Some people have a lot of different projects and they have things already in place, and we're not interested in making them retype it. Got that. Okay. If there's any circumstances on Form 6.1, like prior foreclosures or removals, etc., you can explain those and we will take them into consideration. Form 6.2 also includes currently funded projects under development, so make sure to include those as well. And Form 6.3 includes projects that are in current operations. So you don't have to put the projects under development onto Form 6.3. Okay, I'm going to questions. Do our past projects need to be in the state of Arizona to qualify for points? Or if you have tax credit projects, those count as well? Yes, they count no matter where they are. They do not need to be in the state of Arizona to qualify for points. They can be in other states. Development team, you want to put also development experience, the narrative of who's in your development team. You want to put their resumes behind, so that your officers or supervisory personnel with experience. Every entity that's listed on Form 6 should have a resume. And then explain the specific roles. If you have a developer and a co-developer, who's doing what, because sometimes you'll take on different portions of the development. And then financial statements for 2 full previous calendar years that are available, the most recent ones. So if your 2020 are not available for some reason by April, then put the others and then put like year to date, company prepared operating statements in there. Okay, so tab 7 is where you put your appraisal. We want that in an original of the appraisal. It will tell us our as-is market value. If it's new construction, you're only going to have a land-only appraisal. If it's adaptive reuse or rehab, we want you to break down the land and the building values. And then the land value should be an as-if vacant land value. So whatever it would be if the buildings were cleared, what the vacant land value would be. And then if you're doing a tribal land project, you can use a cost-based appraisal. And then we have an appraisal validation process. If we disagree with your appraisal, we think that there's something, doesn't line up with other projects that are similar, we would implement that process. If there's a land lease, you still require an appraisal. I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't think so. Okay, I'll have to get back on that one. We'll put that in the clarifications. Okay, non-government land. So this is private owned land. All projects we want to get. Every project needs a title commitment dated within 60 days of the application. If there's a purchase and sale agreement or an option on the land, then you want to have a hard copy of your executed binding commitment. We don't want to see any contingencies except the award of the tax credits in there on your part. In other words, they can't pull your deal from you for anything except not receiving the tax credits. You may have other things that you as the developer want to see from them, assuming that you get the application. But remember that you have to build on the land that you have put into your application. We also have to have an initial term or closing date allowing you at least 180 days after April 1st. Actually, it should be not 2019, it should be 2021. Apologize for that. And environmental review language should be in there. If you have HUD financing, you may want to look that up. We don't have that in our application right now, but if you apply under a NOFA, you may be required to do that. If the land, if you own it, we want to just see a recorded deed. We want to see your final settlement statement that you, when you purchased the land, not the estimated one. And if you're leasing the land, we want to see your lease agreement. It has to be a minimum of 30-year term. The owner is also going to be required to execute the land use restriction agreement, basically saying that they would step into your shoes with compliance if for some reason you were not to be able to operate the property any longer. And even the rent payments need to be spread over the lease term. It's an operating cost. It's not something that you capitalize and put into your development budget. So if you're leasing land, just be aware of that. If we manage non-owned properties, do you want that included on Form 3? No, you don't have to put properties that you don't own and you don't control on the Form 3. It's just stuff that you own. If you have tribal land, we want to see a hard copy of the lease or the agreement to enter into a lease between the tribe and the owner. It should specify what the lease payment is, and it should be through the term of the 30-year term of the LORA. And we'll consider the length of the lease to be the original term plus the term of an option to renew if it's solely held by the applicant. We want to see approval from the tribe or the Bureau of Indian Affairs or other government that's required. Sometimes they don't, that we should definitely have an IA may come later. And it's off reservation. For example, in the town of Guadalupe, the Pasquayaqui tribe has land that's off the reservation, but it is considered to be the reservation from the federal public law that established it as tribal land. If it's a government land sale, we want to see the title commitment, the government body approved the sale of the land, the executed binding commitment in hard copy. The only remaining contingency is the tax credit award, and you need to have that environmental review language in there, and the closing date at least 180 days after April 1st of this coming year. Government land lease, we want to have a government body approval, the hard copy of your lease agreement. You have to have at least 30-year extended use period to cover that amount of time, and your lease rent should be specified. And the government's agency who's leasing the land will have to execute the LORA as well. Tab 7, the environmental reviews, you want to put those in there, anything that's required up front. So we don't require a phase 1 right up front, but if you have, some other kind of government funding or something like that, we want to see if you've got like a floodplain to deal with. If you're in a floodway, like in the middle of the Salt River, you're not eligible for tax credits. If you're in a 100-year floodplain and you've got a LOMA F from FEMA, which basically takes the land out of the floodplain, you just want to put that in there and then show the 8-step process. The historic, if you have a hard copy of your Section 106 process completed, if you have historic development, and we want to see your certified local government or ship a letter saying that there's no adverse effects or it's mitigated. Site plan approval is not a scoring category, but if you have an actual site plan that's approved, you're welcome to put that into tab 7. The site plan, you do have to have a site plan at tab 12, but it can be a conceptual one. It doesn't have to be something that's approved by the local government entity unless that is required to meet your requirement of tab 8 to show that the property is zoned. You want to put your Form 8 into your tab 8. It should be signed by the local government official approving that your land is zoned. It's only talking about the current phase. So if you have multiple phases, they should only be talking about the current phase because they're going to put the square footage of the land and those kinds of things in there showing that this is what we're doing for this project. We also want to see will serve level letters in there for new construction, water and sewer. And they should be dated no later than April 1st, 2021. And utilities, if you have rehab, then you want to put your utility bill in until you want to do a dated one within 60 days. So you do February's or March's utility bill. So if you look at your Form A, it says the current zoning status is as of date of certification. So they want to put the type of zoning that you've got. And then you're going to put down the number of multifamily units to be built, the number of buildings, how high the buildings are, the size of the project site in acres for this phase, if you've got multiple phases, the square footage of the commercial space, if it's applicable for this phase, and then describe any remaining processes that you need to pull permits and begin construction. So if you need to go through design review, put that in there. Whatever's required in order to do that. And land has to be zoned properly in order to be eligible. It has to be currently zoned that if you wanted to go build that property today, as you're describing that, not with design review, of course, that you could do that. You don't want to go through any other zoning processes. And then you want to make sure that everything that's on Form 3 matches the Form 8 and that you can build it. Okay, questions. Here we go. Is zoning a threshold requirement in application? Yes, it is. For items due to be dated within 180 days of April for 2021, does that translate to within 180 days application submission for 4% apps? Yes. Okay, financial ability to proceed. You have to have a letter of interest or intent from each of the financing sources. So you've got your tax credit syndicator. You're going to want to know the terms and pricings. If you're a nonprofit, you want to have that right of first refusal in there. If they are planning on an average income election on your Form 8609s, that should be in there. And all other sources, you're going to want a term sheet from them. So you want the amount, what their interest rate is. If for some reason they're using an index, they should put in there the interest rate at which they are underwriting the application. So you may be tied to an index, that's fine, but we want to know what their underwriting interest rate is. But there's points or fees for that, how long it's being amortized for, what the term of it is, the loan to value, and the debt coverage ratio. It's approved. No more questions over there. So if you have a local government funding under other funding, you want to submit your letter that's conditioned only on an award of the tax credits and city council approval. So sometimes city council meets later than April 1st. The city, for example, the city of Phoenix will give you a letter that's conditioned on the award of the tax credits, and then they'll take all the winning applications to city council for approval. And that has to be within, I think, 180 days after your award. If you're denied by the city council, then you have up to 150 days from that reservation to secure the same amount from an alternative source. Federal Home Loan Bank, likewise, the application, I believe their application is due the same day as ours. We want a copy of the application you submitted to them. If you are not awarded in the list of awards that are posted, I believe usually it's in June, you have up to 150 days from the date of your reservation to secure an amount of funding from an alternate source. No more questions there. Also, we want to see a letter from the property management company certifying the operating expense reasonableness. If you have an operating expense waivers, they have to be supported with data. You don't put that waiver here, you put that in tab 1. But if you need a waiver, then you have to support it with data. You do not have to put in a pro forma anymore because we have the pro forma based upon the information that you gave us in the Form 3. We want to see you put your developer fee and any consulting agreements in there. A list of persons receiving a portion of developer fee is what we're looking for, and who's being paid. We also want a list supported by agreements describing the service and the amount. So in tab 10, you're going to want to put your market demand study. We want a hard copy of that study. Use the most current data that's available, especially as time comes around at this time, like even though they took the 2020 census, that 2020 census data may not yet be available for some time. So use the most current data that's available. Straight line distances, they'll be used for scoring. So they're usually from the edge of your application, the edge of the property to whatever the amenity is. The proposed amenities that are listed in the market demand study should be consistent with the ones that you're listing on Form 3 of your application. You also should demonstrate that the product has adequate new demand. So if you got high vacancy, in the market, I mean, that's not an issue right now from what I understand, but we may not award, if there's a project in a location that has no market for it. We'll also require explanations if the gross capture rate is higher than 10% or the net new household capital ratio is higher than 20%. It doesn't mean that we won't award them. We just want an explanation. And usually they just put that in the market study. Question, is a waiver needed if a project is exempt from property taxes and expenses drop below $4,700 all amount? You would want to put in a waiver, yes, if your project is exempt from property taxes. You'd also want to have documentation that it is exempt from property taxes. And you believe that if you believe the expenses are going to drop below $4,700, then you explain it all. Yes, you can do that. Okay, the next section is service enriched location, which is grocery stores. So if you're within 2 miles of a grocery store in an urban location or 5 miles from a non-tribal balance of state location, you are eligible for 15 points. If you're in a tribal set aside, you have varying points based upon the distance. So it can be 5 miles, 10 miles, and 15 miles, and the points decrease with 15 miles over 5 miles. I'm going to put in an aerial map and your Form 11. So you want to fill out the Form 11 completely, which is basically just where's the grocery store, what's the address, etc. We don't award points if it's not complete. We want to know which grocery store this is and where it is. The aerial map needs to show the location of the grocery store. And then you put in like the direct distance from the edge of your project that's closest to the grocery store to the project. We don't measure to the parking lot, to the property line of the grocery store, et cetera. And I'll show you a couple examples. And obviously, while these wonderful little things that go around are wonderful amenities for people, that is not a service enriched location. If some bus comes to you, so you can select grocery products. What you want to see in there is that the name, address, and phone number from Form 11. We want to make sure that the size of the facility is, I think it's got to be at least 5,000 square feet. Provide evidence that it meets the definition. So you put web page ads, store ads, certification from the store manager, photos, etc. We also have a list of grocery stores that automatically qualify. They're in the QAP. So you only have to put like the web pages, etc. if it's not on that list. And it needs to be in existence and operating, not like a proposed grocery store that's going to be built. So you want to make sure you map the existing tax credits and other government subsidized housing within 5 miles of the project site. And then sometimes people put that into more than one page because there's sometimes a lot of them. And the grocery store aerial map has to include the name of the grocery store and the distance. And then if you've got scattered sites on tribal land, you want to measure it from the subdivision that contains the most housing units. So if you've got multiple subdivisions, you want to evaluate which one you want to take. So for example, people used to do these little ring studies. We're not looking for that. We're looking for just a very simple Google Earth. You take it, there's your site, there's your store, and then it should show how many feet it is. And here's another example. So for example, here is the facility. This is a grocery store. I think it's the Walmart, and it was taken from this site in Guadalupe where they had built a site a couple of years ago. Take it from the edge of their site over here. You draw a line. You show us how many square feet, how many linear feet it is. Again, we're calculating to the building, not anywhere to the edge of the shopping center or the grocery store. Just it has to go to the store itself. Okay, no other questions. Okay, moving on. Tab 12, we also have the scoring categories, 1 point available for projects which are 100% new construction and don't include rehabilitation or improvement or any existing buildings. If you are a property that's acquisition, demo, new construction, you have to offer relocation assistance. And that is also including ones for commercial tenants as well. If you have up to 15 points available for projects that demonstrate building efficiency described in the following slides. So you want to insert the Form 12, which is your architect certification. You want to do Form 12-1, which is his certificate or her certificate of building efficiency. You want to put your site plan in, which has to have your topography. If you're on a hill, I mean, if it's a generally flat site, we don't need to see that. The streets that are bordering the site, the outdoor amenities that are claimed on Form 3 should match. And that's an example of something that, you know, we would probably come back with you a carryover to say this is an issue, you know, make sure that you change your site plan to show those outdoor amenities so that they match. It's not something that you wouldn't get awarded because of that. Conceptual plans must support building efficiency certification so that they should be consistent. We actually do an official review of the building efficiency when we do your build, when you're actually ready to start building, we send them out to be measured. For now, we accept what your architect puts in on Form 12-1. And then we make sure to review Exhibit D for any other further design requirements that are required in there. So for example, if you have to have a laundry room because you don't have washer dryer hookups we're going to look and say, hey, that's missing. We need to have that. So we just need conceptual plans and elevations for each building, the clubhouse, common areas, what each unit type is going to look like, building layout. Make sure to put the layout of the clubhouse, you know, in the common areas as well, not just the unit type, so that we can see that it has all the things that are proposed and are required. The net floor area of the common areas and the residential floor area of each unit type. And you have to make sure it adheres to Exhibit D. Okay. So building efficiency, what we're looking for is the residential floor space compared to the whole building. And the ratio for your score has to be maintained in order to avoid the loss of project. So for example, if you need to maintain a 70% efficiency and you're at like 69.99 or something like that, you don't have a lot of wiggle room when it comes down to your finalizing of your plans. But if you had put in something that was, excuse me, sorry, the other way around, it should be like 71% versus 70%. But if you have 60%, for example, to get your 15 points and you just barely make it because you're 59.99%, you don't have a whole lot of wiggle room. If you are at 55% or higher and it drops below that 60, then you'd be dropping down to 10 points and you might lose your allocation. So we have multiple different types of building efficiency. If you've got an urban structured parking project, that means that you actually have a garage in there, not podium parking. That's how we measure it for that. If you have permanent supportive housing, that also has the same percentages. Those are projects that are awarded in the permanent supportive housing set aside. The urban podium, so for example, if you just have a podium or tuck-in parking or something like that, we're not going to include anything but the building envelope, you know, from the ceiling of the podium parking up into the building is what would be included for that. Housing for older persons with 100% of units on double loaded corridors are another choice in here. If you're in a single family or duplex subdivision on tribal land or in the balance of state, the percentages are also different. And then every other project that doesn't fit into one of those other categories is, you know, you have to meet 80% building efficiency to get 15 points. How do you do tuck under parking? Well, the tuck under parking is not included in the building efficiency score, just like podium parking is not included in the building efficiency score. But if you've got a portion of your building that is, you know, like the ground floor, and you've got a a building on the ground floor and then you're putting things underneath, then we're going to take the floor plate of that ground floor, and then we're going to take the floor plate of the building, the floor above that one, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Does that answer your question? Good. All right. So tab 12, the things that have to match, and I think we've gone through this before on your Form 3, but just to reiterate, your total residential floor area on tab 12, which is on the right-hand side, has to match the total residential rental unit floor area on your page 6 of your form. I think it's page 5 of your Form 3, but that's section 4 where we list the percentages and the unit numbers. And then your total project square footage on your tab 12 needs to match the same total project square footage on your Form 3. And then the net residential floor area for the residential rental units on their Form 3 matches the other portion of Form 3, I think it was on page 6. Unit square footage. So building efficiency scoring is based upon residential floor area within the QAP limits. You are allowed to build up to 100 square feet for a porch or deck or balcony. You are also allowed to, so we add that to the residential floor area when we calculate that. And then if you've got a duplex or a garage on tribal land, you're allowed to build, a garage. We're not going to tell you, we're not going to take it out of eligible basis, but we are not going to include the garages in your unit, your residential floor area for purposes of building efficiency scoring. So utility allowance schedule should be provided by your resident rater unless you are subject to a HAP contract or some other government required utility allowance, in which case you would put down that information. The resident relator should not be related to or controlled by the owner or the property manager. But if you've got like USDA or HUD or your 100% owner paid utilities, you do not need to include a resident rater utility allowance because you're paying all the utilities. And then if you have like the PHA is the controlling interest in the project where they're required to give a different one to HUD, that's okay as well. If you've got home units, you use your utility allowance based upon the consumption, even if it's project-based vouchers. So this is the latest website from okay, wait. Our ground floor porch is counted in the total square foot as a balcony on the second floor. It depends. And I think we had some examples that were in the clarifications in years past. If there's like a wall around it, like a little pony wall or something like that, yes. But if you're just putting a cement slab outside of it, no. That's the most clear example that I can give you. And I know we had several photos that we had in there in the clarifications. I'll look and see if I can find them, put those photos again, because I think they were very helpful. Okay. So the resident rater is a little bit different. So you just go to resident.us, and go to the section that they have on providers, and then you'll find a national registry of providers. You can look at Arizona and hit search, and it'll give you a list of resident raters that you can use. There's a couple of them that are pretty active in this state that do a lot of them. And then they prepare the utility allowance in tab 13 and the HERS index, which is inserted in tab 14. So this is where, even if you're paying all utilities, you may need to get a resident rater, because in tab 14, you need to show a certain HERS rating. But we'll continue on plans. So you provide the resident certified professional with plans so that they can see what you're planning on doing. They're going to need they're going to need elevations. They can be conceptual at that time. The list of your target design specifications and mechanical systems that you're planning on using, and then they can use that. And then when you're done with your construction, they're going to update that utility allowance based upon the updated information at the end. And so then everything would be underwritten based upon that utility allowance instead. So, but you can use the one in your, you can use the one that you put in as long as you haven't had a full year of operations. You can use the one that we use for underwriting for your first year lease up. And then you're going to be needing to obtain bills and things like that with the leasing paperwork, so that way you can get the bills to do it in following years. Okay, so we talked about after 12 months of consumption data, you're going to submit the bill releases to the utility company and request the previous 12 months of utility bill data for the occupied units, and you're going to give those to your rater, and they're going to provide an updated letter to ADUH with the updated utility allowance for the year. They're done each year. All projects at tab 14 have to meet at a 65 HERS index. So, well, that's very nice. Appreciate the little advertisement there. So everyone knows JKP Energy Inspections is available, among others, to do to be a resident rater. So everyone needs to achieve a HERS index of 65. So your HERS rater would go and tell you whether the building that you're proposing to design meets that index. If you're doing rehabilitation, again, this is even for bond projects, you need to improve the weighted average HERS index by 15%. So talk to your rater early. They will tell you what you need to do at a bare minimum to increase the average HERS index by 15%. And often it's things like windows and doors and insulations. You don't necessarily need to go and tear apart, you know, all the drywall and redo all of your ducts and stuff to meet that. And insert that evidence at tab 14. Okay, tab 15 is transit-oriented development. So this has changed a little this year. So you have to have public bus or high-capacity transit. You can get up to 15 points for those if it's within a half a mile in the greater Phoenix area or the city of Tucson. And then outside of the greater Phoenix area and the city of Tucson, if it's within a mile. And I forgot to update this. You don't have to worry about the 30 minutes weekdays and 1 hour. I forgot to delete that for some reason. I missed that. But it's just based upon distance this year. And then if you're from a rail station, 15 points, transit station within a half mile of the site, including the existing operating Phoenix Metro light rail stops, the Tucson streetcar stops, the South Central light rail. I think they were in the middle of building that to Baseline Road. Anything northwest to phase 2, the light rail, all these are available for points. Many times there's also a bus that's available, but just pick whichever one. You don't need to put in both, you only need to put in one. So you want to insert the form 15, which is basically a checklist reminding you what to put in. You want to put a map of either your frequent bus transit or your high capacity, showing the applicable distance to the bus stop or to the transit stop. You can put a schedule, not because we're going to check the headways per se, but we want to make sure that the stop is in existence. And then light rail, et cetera, you want to just put their schedule in there as well. One of the things that you can remember is that the schedule can't be published any earlier than January 1, 2019. Now that's an accommodation right now because I know that they've had some differences in schedules because they may have had to pull some stuff back. So that's why we'll allow a schedule that's published earlier than that. Define greater Phoenix area. Every area that is included in Maricopa County for purposes of calculating out rents is greater Phoenix area. So you're talking about the cities of like Tempe, and Mesa, and Avondale, Buckeye, etc. Just like the MSA, yes, exactly. So you're aware of that. And then this is new this year on Form 15. So if, for example, you want to compete in the balance of state set aside and you want to be a project that says, I don't have public transportation, then this is where you would check that down. You put the project is located in a growing municipality, a census designated place with no public use, no public bus transportation. And so you'd have to just put in 5-year estimates showing an increase in population. We've actually compiled a list that we got from the Census Bureau that we can post on our website that shows all of the places that are they're not the census designated places that like have less than 5,000 people, but all the places that are incorporated within the state, we have that listed. So we'll post that on our website, and we'll show it's everything up to 2019 because 2020 hasn't yet been published. So you got 2015, 16, 17, 18, and 19. And if 15 was higher than 19, then you probably are not going to be able to be eligible there. But if you are in something that is a smaller place that's not designated there and you've got evidence that it's growing, you can give us that evidence at that time as well. In addition to that, then you want to have a letter from the chief official of the local government with jurisdiction over the site that certifies there's no public bus transport within the jurisdiction of boundaries of the municipality or census designated place. So, for example, you could have your city manager or your mayor or somebody sign off on a letter. Okay, regarding the Valley Metro local stops, does the stop need to be listed on the Valley Metro website? Not all stops on any given bus line are listed on the website. That is true. They are not necessarily all listed, and no, they do not need to be listed because a lot of times they're like a mile away just to give a general idea of when it is. So just give us the stop number because there's a stop number that's usually listed there, and then we can find that stop. And then you're going to want to show photos and maps of it. So we'll be able to verify it that way. Okay. So we talked about if there's no public bus transit, insert the form 15. You want to put the estimates for the increase in population. We're going to post that table on our website so you can easily look it up. And there are some places that have been losing population. And then local government letter, evidence that there's no public bus transportation. Okay, here's an example of a map. So you're going to measure from the edge of your site, and there's the bus stop over there. And one of the wonderful things about things like Google Earth is you can really, really zero in there and find out where it is. And it has to be based upon the number of feet. If you're using a light rail stop, we're going to go to where do you enter the light rail station. Before I go on, is there any questions about transportation? Okay, so moving on, tab 16 is where you put your information regarding supportive housing development in. We have to have at least 30 units that are committed for permanent supportive housing in the project, and those units need to have rental assistance committed to them that's project-based. Usually there's a threshold, your local government, you have to have them give you a letter with the availability of vouchers, their annual housing plan to define that there is a process for project-based vouchers and there's a targeted population for those vouchers. And so you just get that letter and you put it into your application. The next thing you have to do is the supportive services plan, which is Exhibit B, and then you're going to show your contract for your supportive services in there as well. And every project that's supportive housing has to have a preference for veterans. That doesn't mean that it's set aside for veterans. It just means that if you've got two people that are appearing at the same time, the same qualifications, same SPDAT score, et cetera, you're going to take the veteran over the other person. So there's 5 points for occupancy categories, and there's 4 different types. Households with children, older persons, veterans, and special populations. So you're going to insert a description of that project's, of your project's specific design elements that serve the needs of your targeted population. And then you're going to insert letters of support and collaboration for veterans and special populations projects so that you can receive points for that. So it's not just saying I'm going to have this number of units, it's also inserting the design requirement, the designs. I'll get to that in 1 second. The design elements, and it's also where applicable, the letters of support collaboration. So for an occupancy preference for households with children, do 2-bedroom units need to have more than 1 bath? They just need to meet the design requirements in Exhibit D. I don't believe they need to have more than 1 bathroom in a 2-bedroom unit. So you have 5 points with households with children. 40% of the units would offered on a preferential basis to families with children. I'll get to that in a second. And then 40% of units must include at least 2 of the following unit types, 2, 3, and 4 bedrooms. So you can have 2 and 3, or 2 and 4, or 3 and 4. Any of those combinations will work. And then insert the description of design elements that serve those individuals with children. If you have housing for older persons, 5-point housing for older persons projects. So you've got, there has to be independent living. This is not for assisted living. 80% of the units are age restricted to 55 or and older is one type. 100% for restricted for 62 and older is the second type. And a HUD determination. This is fair housing law. It's exactly what is in the Fair Housing Act. None of the units are allowed to be larger than 2 bedroom, and then you insert your description of design elements that serve older persons. For veterans projects, at least 50% of the units are a preference for veterans, 25% and at least 25 units. So you have to have, if you have a unit that is 50 unit project, 25 of them are set aside for veterans and 25% of them are eligible for others to live at. You're going to insert a description of design elements that serve veterans, and then you're going to have letters of support and collaboration. So for special populations projects, we have a lot of different categories for that. And someone's asking, are there limits to the age when those disabilities were diagnosed? And the answer is that there's different types. So for example, if you have something called serious emotional disturbance, that particular diagnosis is something that is diagnosed prior to the age of 18. Whereas you can have something with developmental disabilities, which could be done at any age. Physical disabilities can be any age, but serious emotional disturbance is something that has an onset usually prior to the age of 18. I have not seen anyone submit an application for that, but it's something that is available to submit. Okay. So these are the different types of populations that you can do, and it's only up to 25% of the units can serve that population. So you can't keep the rest of the population. It has to be for, in general, tax credits are general public use. So this is allowable if you have up to 25% being served by the project. QAP lives with physical disability diagnosis is to age 22. I will look at that, but I think it may be a misunderstanding. Yeah, we'll look at that and then we'll post something. I think that's the serious emotional disturbance, because I can't imagine that physical disabilities have to be diagnosed before you're 22. Okay. So what you want to insert is the project's design elements that will be integrated with the needs of the special needs population that's targeted. The description has to address the Fair Housing Act. So, you know, if you want to design a project that's only for this particular group of people, how are you meeting the Fair Housing Act? It has to be above and beyond just putting uniform federal accessibility standards in your, you know, in terms of how, you know, height level of counters and things like that. It has to be described how you're going to address the Fair Housing Act. In addition, you want to put letters of support and collaboration that demonstrate that that particular population specific resources and services are going to be tied to this property. Any other questions on that? Is it possible to serve more than one special needs population in the 25%? You select one for purposes of your special needs application. And in general, you can't do more than one, even though you may serve people that come on a general public basis that happen to have disabilities. So for example, let's just say that you got a project and you've targeted people who are homeless is one of the special needs population. Only 25% of the units are reserved for homeless households. Now that doesn't mean that you can't serve other people that come who have a physical disability or escaping domestic violence or, you know, et cetera, that they can't live there. But in this particular scoring category, you are targeting one population. And then the other part is that you can't restrict other people from coming in for the other 75% of the project. Does that make sense? Thank you. Okay. So moving on, is there any other questions on the populations and the targeting of occupancy preferences? Okay, moving on to tab 18, targeting low-income levels. To the left is a sample calculation of how it's all calculated underneath the form. But you insert Form 18. If your average income that pops up on the form is less than equal to 50%, you get 35 points. If it's less than or equal to 55%, you get 30 points. And if it's less than or equal to 60%, you get 25 points. This is new this year. It just provides a little bit greater flexibility in terms of how you decide to put your income ranges in. But basically, a sample calculation, if you have all three the same as 3,300, you divide it by that by 66 units, you get 50% AMI. So you fill in the form with the number of 0-bedroom, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5s. If it's an employee unit, it's not counted in there. If it's a market unit, it's not counted in there in terms of the average. You have up to 4 income bands max, which is above and beyond the code, but it also provides a little more sanity for your property manager. And then it's equally distributed to avoid, having all of the higher income units at like the 5-bedroom and all the lower end in order to have greater income at the property. Any more questions on that? Okay, eventual tenant ownership is an opportunity that you have in order, all you have to do is insert a letter from the local government evidencing that the project design meets the subdivision building code requirements, including fire department requirements. And then in the area where units set aside for, and you've got tenant lease purchase, you just fill that in with how many units are designed for tenant lease purchase. We have on occasion had a project that was a mixture of tenant lease purchase and apartment buildings and stuff like that. We have done that. And then what we did was we went and just had separate LURAs for those different parts. Concerning tab 19, I'm going to just read this real quick so everybody gets the question. Item A, tax credit organization of the QAP states 80 must reserve tax credits to follow to paraphrase. First, to projects that each set aside with the highest competitive score, and second, to projects that don't qualify for a set aside category, with preference given to project with the highest score. So the QAP selection criteria is and always has been based on ADOH audited scores, correct? Okay, and project item A. Okay, everything is based upon the sections and the scores. That is what we base our stuff on, yes. And it is permitted in the QAP to do that type of project.
Clarification if necessary.
We can post a clarification if necessary.
There's more to that question, Jeannie.
Oh, is there more? Okay. You know what? We're gonna read through this and we'll post it in the clarifications as appropriate because it's rather long.
It has several parts. It's talking about different things.
Yeah. So we'll get back to you. Tab 20, relocation plan, commercial and/or residential tenants. It doesn't matter if it's commercial or residential tenants. The Uniform Relocation Act applies to both. You're going to insert your relocation plan according to the URA. We want to know the dates that the notices are to be issued. You want to estimate all the costs, the temporary relocation, the permanent relocation, any replacement housing payments, stuff to move people, etc. Those are all going to be listed in your development budget for in tab 3. And you want to also make sure that if for some reason you're knocking down a building to build new construction, the initial replacement unit rent at place and service is not going to exceed the the RA rent, the rental assistance rent that was there for some reason. And if you're purchasing a building, you want to make sure that it was vacant at the time of sale, when it was placed for sale. Okay, capital needs assessment. Insert Form 20, your certification from your person preparing that. You want to make sure that your rehab and adaptive reuse costs were based upon your CNA, and your cost estimator is going to review plans with you beforehand to make sure that it's appropriate. If you, we talked about supporting relocation class with the relocation plan, and then rehabilitation costs is going to be reviewed by an independent cost estimator to determine whether or not the costs are reasonable. So if you are doing relocation and you are doing rehabilitation, allow some money in your development budget for that. That's mostly for projects that are 4%, because the 9% has the extra score for the new construction. If you're doing historic preservation, 1 point is possible for a historic preservation project is defined in the QAP, and that is a project that actually is doing rehabilitation of a historic building. So you would be evidencing the 106 review was completed, your certified local government or your SHPO certification letter from the applicable agency would be included in there. And your evidence that the project is historic, whether or not it's listed on the National Register of Historic Places or it just contributes to a register district. And even if you're not going to use historic tax credits, if it meets this and you are rehabilitating a building, we want to see these things done. We're also going to refer to the site plan to confirm that historic preservation project definition is met. See, it's 10:51. Okay.
You want to do a break? Or?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, why don't I go and we'll take like a 5-minute break, and then that way people, if they need to go and check on their phone messages or something like that for a few minutes, they can do that. Yeah, so we'll convene at 11 o'clock. My watch says 10:52. Okay. Okay, everybody, we're back. So the next slide is on project-based rental assistance. This is tab 22. It's really it's applicable to project-based, permanent supportive housing projects and to tribal set-aside projects. So you're going to insert the documentation. Tribal set-aside has 10 points available for this. There's no points anywhere else. At least 80% of the units have to have rental assistance committed as of the application deadline in order to get those points for the tribal set-aside. And you need to include the documentation for the term of the commitment, the provisions for renewal. And if you have a RAD program project, you want to insert your chat from HUD explaining that you're going to have that rental assistance available. The next tab 423 is there's 10 points available for waiving your qualified contract, which means you will, there's no qualified contract at the end of year 15 that you would be maintaining your affordability for the entire 30-year extended use period. You fill in the name of the applicant entity and then the name of the project, and then the little line afterwards, you're putting the applicant entity because that's who is making the representation and certification. And then they certify that they're doing it, the person signs, print the name, put what the position is that they have in that entity. The title is the position held in the entity, not the person's job title. So, you know, if I'm rental programs administrator, I'm not signing as rental programs administrator, I'm signing as managing member in this particular instance. Question, since the tiebreaker uses project-based vouchers as a secondary category, isn't tab 22 also necessary for project? Has any project-based vouchers and hopes to use it for a tiebreaker? Yes, you may put that in there. That's permitted to put that in there if you want to do that for the second tiebreaker. Under concerted community revitalization plan, we have the state, we use the state special project as the criterion for that. It's not a scoring category because it's within the set aside. ADUH considers the geographic specificity, that there's a clear direction for the implementation of the concerted community revitalization plan. And we look at whether the plan also, in addition to housing, provides jobs and transportations and other things within that geographic boundary. There has to be a demonstrated need for revitalization. The community and stakeholder participation had to be in there in drafting the plan, and there has to be a clear strategy to obtain committed resources to implement the plan. Do locally determined redevelopment areas meet the requirements under the QAP for concerted community revitalization plans? That depends upon whether there's actually a revitalization plan in effect that is concerted and is going to get the area revitalized within a relatively short period of time. Tab 25 is the tribal set aside, non-general pool scoring categories. So they have entities formed by tribal development housing entities. Tribally designated housing entities. The tribes must insert a resolution from the tribe that authorizes the applicant to act on behalf of the tribe to develop the project. Not more than one project on a tribal land is permitted. So for example, if you have a chapter or a smaller area that is applying, they can't be two competing tribal applications on the same tribe's land. And then you're going to want to see the instructions for the other tabs for grocery store in tab 11, the building efficiency in tab 12, the applicant entity in tabs 3, 4, and 9, targeting low income levels, which is the same this year as the other applications, and the project-based rental assistance, et cetera. Next question. Is there an age limit to the plans? There is not a specific age limit to the plan, but it has to show that there's ongoing continual action associated with that plan through annual reports, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to show that there is still ongoing development of that plan and implementation of that plan in effect that has to do with housing, amongst other things like transportation, et cetera. Okay, moving on. Trying to get back to the local tribal government leverage, new funding towards the development budget, commitment from the tribe. So you have to have your house or other tribal funding. And that's based upon your tribal enrollment. So 3% gives you, you have to put in that if you have 25,000 people or more, et cetera, going on down to 0.5% if you have fewer than 1,000 members. Common issues. These are things that we come up with normally that are, we see these a lot in applications and then different kinds of submittals that come out afterwards. So your project characteristics are inconsistent within the document, so they should all be the same. So if you're saying that you're going to build a playground in one area, you should say the same thing in the other areas. If you have any kind of pro forma that you submit in addition that differs from the Form 3, if your financing letter of intent doesn't specify an interest rate assumption, your square footages don't match between your documents. We went through that a lot. Your equities letter of intent needs to specify the pricing for the credits. Your information in your third-party reports are inconsistent with the other packages that are submitted, and your failure to document your points claimed. 4%.
You have a question? Just say-
Another question. No, we went through that already.
Okay, we're good.
That's
Got it.
fine.
Okay.
So 4% bond projects. Contact your Arizona Finance Authority for the volume cap. Applications should include all the non-scoring items in section 2.9, and then they should also include, if you're asking for a final determination of qualification, all the documents required at carryover and the equity closing. So you can see Exhibit F for the list of the non-scoring items in general. We want to see volume cap confirmation. You do not have to have that at your initial application, especially if you're just asking for a conditional determination qualification letter. Your 50% test should be included in the CPA opinion. Again, if you're just asking for your initial, like a conditional determination qualification, you don't have to have the CPA opinion in there yet, but it does need to be in there before we give you the final. And then you have to meet all the non-scoring requirements like underwriting, design standards, all those things do apply. So for example, the ratio between your cash flow and your operating expense does apply to all projects, including bond projects. Your 4% credit rate is now, well, let me wait one more thing before we do that. So we take them on a rolling basis. And then also reminder that if for some reason you get volume cap between January 1st and March 31st, that you have to close by March 31st. So you really don't want to go and get that volume cap until you're closer to be ready to close unless you had a 3-year carry forward in December. The 4% credit rate is now fixed for projects that are closing January 1st, 2021 or later. I know that there is some questions about the language and what that means for projects that may be placed in service in 2021 or later, whether or not, like, can I come back and get a 4% fixed rate and stuff. Right now to date, there's been no guidance from the IRS on that. So for right now, we're looking at projects that are closing on their bonds January 1st, 2021 or later. Obviously, they'll be placed in service after January 1st, 2021. And then, of course, when you're applying for the 2021 LIHTC 9% round, the 4% rate is applicable to the acquisition credits. Okay. The next one is the underwriting standards. It's whether your project is feasible. So the underwriting standards is something that, you know, if for some reason you don't meet something, you can request a waiver. There's certain waivers that we will, you know, things like, you know, the operating expenses, if it can be supported, certain things that we don't waive. So we don't waive, you know, the cash flow to operating expense ratio. We don't waive the amount of eligible basis that's maxed out, those kinds of things. So you just have to be aware of that. To ensure financial feasibility, we underwrite a minimum of 4 times. One is the original application submission. The second is prior to carryover allocation. The third is prior to equity closing, and the fourth is at 8609, which is the final allocation. We also review the 10% test. Your operating pro forma, you want to make sure that your rents don't exceed your maximum allowable under Section 42. They're going to be verified against the market study. Any reduction from maximum allowable rents has to be fully justified in the market study as necessary for feasibility, not just as a cushion. Vacancy rate, we want to see a lesser of 10% or the market study stabilized vacancy rate. Usually the market study is lower. Additional income's underwritten up to $20 per unit per month. Whoops, oh darn, how did you go back? Oh, here we go. I'm sorry about that. So replacement reserves are not a capitalized item. They're done during operations only. If you have new construction elderly, then it's $250. Otherwise, all other projects are $350 per unit per year. We underwrite the operating expenses at $4,700 a unit for acquisition, rehabilitation, and we underwrite up to $180 per unit per year can be added in for Wi-Fi services that you're providing free to the residents. Asset management fees, reserves, support services are not included in the $4,700. Our compliance fees are part of the administrative costs, so they are included. And this assumption assumes that tenants are paying all the utilities except water, sewer, and trash. So, for example, if you're an owner that's going to be paying all of the utilities for the residents, then you would be adding the amount that's in the utility allowance to that base amount above. And we do include the employee units in that $4,700 per unit per year. So add that unit in when you're calculating that. If you have a land lease, I think I mentioned this before, they are an operating expense. They're paid evenly throughout the lease term. It is not something that is capitalized up front. The rate of increase for a pro forma, everything's increasing at 2% for income, 3% for operating expenses, 3% for replacement reserves. If it's applicable, you can include a trending of any partnership or investor fees or something like that, that might be in there. For debt service, we look at your primary mortgage. It has to be fully amortized for at least 25 years. Then your loan term is through the compliance period for 15 years at least, and then competitive interest rates. So we look at your interest rate compared to others. You have to maximize out your permanent financing. We look at the trending 2% over 3%, as we talked about before. Your debt coverage ratio can't be any greater than 1.2 or less than 1.10 at the loan maturity. However, we do allow a greater debt service coverage ratio in year one than those amounts, assuming that it's trending down. If it's trending up, then you're going to want to start at a 1.20 and then it would increase. Your average surplus cash flow may not exceed 10% of your direct operating expense. So debt service coverage. So we looked at this before. This is part of tab 14 of the Form 3. And if you look at this particular example, they're starting out, their surplus cash flow is starting at a 7.42. And then they're starting at a debt coverage ratio of 1.21. And then it's going down to 1.20. In other cases, it sometimes is going up. So reminder, it's over a 15-year period. Your average operating expense ratio is down here. It's the average over the 15-year period. So in this particular case, they're starting with 7.42. In this particular case, it happened to have gone down to a 5.82 and over the 15 years. If your loan term is longer than 15 years, we are looking at the first 15 years in terms of the loan term. So you're going to look at the cash flow to operating expense ratio, and we're going to look at that as far as whether your loan's going up or whether it's going down. So for example, if you've got a loan that is starting out at a higher rate and then going down to up to 110, I would be very concerned if it's going below 110 after year 15. Question, can you go back and talk about the additional 180 for Wi-Fi? If Wi-Fi is required, the allowable operating expense is now 4880. Okay, Wi-Fi, first of all, is not required, it's allowed. So if you are putting it in, we are allowing $180 per unit based upon what we've seen in other projects. If the, so yes, it would increase then to $48.80 for that particular project who has $180 for Wi-Fi, but it is not required to put it in. I know we've had some comments that came back when we were in the comment period, talking about that it's not necessarily as easy to do in certain areas of the state. So it's not a requirement. Rental assistance, projects with new projects with new project-based rental assistance are subject to a subsidy layering review. They've always been subject to that, but we're adding a little bit of information in the QAP this year to clarify. You need to request that subsidy layering review at the equity closing review. You of course are welcome to go to HUD and have HUD do it. We are designated by HUD to be allowed to do it, but we don't have to do it for you. You can ask HUD to do it. And if the financial projections change, resulting in the oversubsidization, then later on, because we only do this review once, then we'll notify HUD's Public and Indian Housing Financial Management Division of those changes, and they'll take whatever actions that they deem necessary. We'll usually tell you beforehand so that you're aware of it beforehand, and maybe it can get resolved without that. So the cash flow waterfall is here. This is also in section 7 of the QAP. So you have your actual operating expenses, then your primary debt, then you have your supportive housing services that's limited to the amount that's in your that you've told us up front about it. Then reasonable investor syndicator asset management fee, deferred developer fee principal that's included in your eligible basis. If you do get gap financing through a NOFA, then we would put that after that. Then your local government gap financing, and then any seller carryback loans and related party loans.
You have to start at the top.
I did that already.
Okay.
Okay, and the final one, the QAP mentions it will compare equity letters from similar size projects to determine if present price is reasonable. Can you describe how that comparison is done? How do you consider pay and schedule other soft fund utilization, et cetera? What we do is we compare the equity letters to see whether or not it's reasonable. So if you got, $1.10 and everybody else has 90 cents, we are going to question that $1.10. And we're going to go back to the syndicator to make sure that it's realistic and that that's what they're really going to pay. What we don't consider the pay and schedule and other soft funds utilization, et cetera, when we do that comparison, because most of the time they are fairly much in line within a few cents of one another. But if something is an outlier that we're looking, saying, a couple of years ago, we did have this happen where they were getting $1.12, which we'd never seen. And so we went back to the syndicator and we told them, is this real? Are you really going to be putting in that much equity? And then they said yes. So the next question is, where is interest on the deferred developer fee shown? It is not. It is shown in your agreement with the between the owner and the developer, but it's not shown in this cash flow waterfall. That's something it could get paid later. Sources, disclose all the sources. So supporting documentation, and remember that's something that for us is for underwriting purposes. How you end up paying it is between you and your owner. Comment, a project that has soft funds may have a different pay-in which will make the price different. Yes, and we will verify that it's realistic with the syndicator to make sure that it's reasonable. Say sources. So you've got to disclose all the sources that you have, provide source supporting documentation for those sources in the form of those letters of interest that we talked about. You have to maximize out your primary debt. Letters of credits are not something we consider a permanent source of financing. We also don't take cash from operations as an acceptable development budget source. That is something that on a case-by-case basis you could ask for as part of the underwriting as a waiver request, and we would consider it on a case-by-case basis. But in general, we do not use cash from operations. On your uses, you want to make sure your deferred developer fee shows that it can be repaid within 15 years. Without a waiver, you can't exceed 40% of total developer fee. It's fairly common for 4% bond deals to ask for waivers for exceeding that limit, and we have allowed that, depending upon whether it's necessary. You have to include all your project costs, infrastructure, commercial and retail, common areas and common community facilities, in all of that in terms of your uses. So we want to see everything that's going into the project. Okay, a project is self-funded. That's nice. I can use it. We don't. Acquisition costs verified with the appraisal submitted with the application. Acquisition costs and development budget, the lowest of the original purchase price with documented extension fees and reasonable carrying costs, or the as-is appraisal value at application, or the as-is construction lender's appraisal when you close on your equity, and your as-if values we don't include in your form evaluation. So we take the lesser of those. So it's possible that you're going to submit an application and you'll have an appraised value at the application, and your construction lender will come in and say, well, the land's not worth that much, and we'll take a lower value. That is definitely possible. In addition, we also limit the as-if vacant land value for your land if you're doing act demo new construction. You don't want to include the value of buildings to be demolished in the development budget if you are demolishing them and putting in new construction. The acquisition rehabilitation, we limit the value of the land to the as-if vacant land value. The remaining value of the development budget is allocated to the buildings. And with your land lease, you just want to make sure don't include your upfront capitalized payment of a land lease in the development budget. It's something that's paid over time. If you have principal in common between the seller and the buyer, the equity remains in the project as soft seller financing unless you have a 4% bond deal with no ADOH gap financing. Then it's whatever the current value is. And then these are different scenarios on that. So if you purchase something and you have a couple of income restricted units, and you're participating in an entity that's a managing member of the LLC that's going to own the project, the seller carryback loan is required if you're going to use 9% tax credits. But it's not if you're going to have 4% tax credits and you have our gap financing, then it would be required. But if you just have a 4% project without gap, you don't have to worry about that. Scenario 2. Okay, let me see. Last year, you said that for vacant land owned by the developer and sold to the ownership entity, we could show seller financing at current appraised value, not original purchase price. Is that no longer true? Vacant land owned by the developer, sold to the ownership. I'll have to look at that. I'll have to get back to you on that. Look and see the QAP. Acquisition credit includes the acquisition of the property and improvements that have been owned for 10 years. Even if those buildings are demolished, can you get a waiver to determine the building value in the appraisal, even if you were demolishing? If you're not, we don't provide acquisition credits unless it's an acquisition rehabilitation project. But if you're demolishing a portion of the building and keeping the rest of the building, we'll have to look at it. Scenario 2, John Smith is an affordable housing consultant who owns land. He wants to sell the land to his client, who's a developer. The developer develops a tax credit project on the land. He's not participating in any of the entities that are going to own or control the project. Then you don't have to worry about any kind of seller carryback loan. He can sell it at whatever the value is. Seller scenario 3, a developer created a single purpose entity to act as a participant in the entity structure of an existing tax credit project and wants to re-syndicate the project to bring in needed capital to rehabilitate it with 9% tax credits. The developer plans to create another single purpose entity to participate in the new ownership and structure, then we would require the seller carryback loan. And the fourth is if somebody owns a vacant parcel of land, wants to develop affordable housing on it, it's conveyed to the project owner entity at the appraised value of the land. He may participate in the owner without a seller carryback loan. Okay, scenario 4 answers your question. Thank you. That's why we wrote it. In the past, debt coverage ratio could not grow below 115 during the initial 15-year compliance period. Is that still the case? In general, you don't want it to. I know that we talk about at the end of your maturity date, and generally loans are not maturing within the initial 15-year compliance period. So I would definitely not want to see something that's lower than a 115 during the initial 15-year compliance period. Matter of fact, I think we don't want to see it below 120 in year 15. Financing terms are going to be verified from your term sheet, your letters of intent or commitment letter. Your construction loan financing fee limits up to a maximum amount of 2% for a construction loan. The construction interest is allowable and is multiplied by monthly interest rate divided by 2, multiplied by the number of months in the construction phase. That's how we calculate that. Permanent loan financing fee limit, there's fees capped at 2% of the perm loan amount. You have to maximize permanent debt. Okay. So your developer fee includes overhead, profit, construction management fees, consultant fees, etc. So people that say, oh, I want to increase my developer fee by having an in-house construction management entity and then paying them fees, you can't do that. Everything is included in your development fees. We do not increase your developer fee if your project costs increase. So you put in whatever you put in when you first put in your application with the 9% round. And then if for same thing, if you're doing 4%, if you're putting in an application, that application is the maximum fee that's going to be underwritten. You can't increase it because I'm going to do more construction now. Up to 40% of it can be deferred without any kind of waiver. Anything over $2.5 million is deferred. For 9% projects, we want acquisition credits, developer fee is allocated to the 4% column. And then you exclude the eligible basis for building acquisition if principals of the seller are related to principals of the owner, developer, co-developer, or consultant. The builder fees are the same table we've had for years. So builders, profit, overhead, and general requirements are broken down. There can be variation as long as the total maximum percentage is not exceeded. So, you know, the profit may be a little higher than the overhead number or something like that. The general requirements are something that, you know, if you have a huge amount of general requirements that are absolutely required, for example, you're breaking down the street or something like that, you know, we can consider something that is higher with a waiver request on that. Depends upon what's real, but in general, this is what it is. Required reserve limits, the lease-up reserve is 4 months plus 4 months of primary debt service. Operating reserve, that's as far as what you can put in there, and you don't have to, I think you just 4 months of operating expenses plus 4 months of primary debt service. So that's what you can put in there. Okay, so we underwrite to the letter, the pricing that's in your letter of interest unless it's deemed unreasonable. As I said, we look at different letters to see what they are amongst one another, similar projects. But we also are very aware that, you know, one developer may have a lot more capacity and get a different price than someone else. So it's not like we're going to hold you to that exact amount. We're also going to survey syndicators for the market pricing information. And if something looks like it's out of bounds, again, we will verify that with the person providing the letter. And then we'll adjust the tax credits at equity submittal. So if for some reason we think that we would tell you up front, we'll give you this amount. And then for some reason the amount changes somewhat, we will make the adjustments at equity. but we're not going to give you more credits than we originally promised. And if the pricing changes just for sake of maximizing out the credits, we're not likely to approve that either. So the tax credit percentage, the 9% floor for new construction. We're using 4% floor for acquisition credits going forward. And if you're a tax bond projects, you're going to use the 4% floor going forward. And then we added a basis boost for projects located outside of Maricopa and Pima counties this year. So if you're outside of Maricopa and Pima County, you would automatically qualify for the 130% basis boost. And within Maricopa and Pima counties, you still have the different types of projects that would be allowable for that. We will be putting out a notice funds available if we have gap financing available. We'll figure out that within a reasonable period of time to allow you to determine whether your project is feasible and put out an information bulletin letting you know about that. If you're doing a market demand study, you want to follow the market demand study guide. It did not change this year, so there should be no real questions unless you had something from last year. Check that with your consistency in your application and what's being proposed. These are the eligible basis limits that we have this year that we're allowing. You can get additional 114 total per project if you're doing permanent supportive housing in the permanent supportive housing set aside. TDC per student, so we talked about this before. So you've got the maximum eligible basis over here to the left, and then right with the arrow, that has to be no greater than the maximum allowable. And that is it. Okay, can I repeat the information regarding 80 wedge gap funding? Yes. So if and when gap financing is available, we are going to put out a notice of funds available. We will announce it via information bulletin. And speaking of information bulletins, we just put out a new information bulletin today that provides a new link for next Friday. So we're going to repeat this next Friday. We are going to have the slides posted on our website. We will clean up the little things that say, you know, instead of saying 2019, we'll put 2021. But other than that, they should be the same. Just we want to make sure to we don't have any erroneous information posted. And then we will also post a transcript of this session on our website as well. Can I repeat the information about the basis boost outside of Maricopa and Pima County? Yes. If your project is located outside of Maricopa and Pima counties, you are eligible for 130% basis boost. That is in the QAP. And then also reiterating the question whether or not projects outside of Arizona can qualify as experience. Yes, as long as it's a tax credit project or it's done with other federal financing, it can be outside. And the question about the basis boost outside of Maricopa and Pima County on the 4% as well. Actually, we don't have the authority to extend the eligible basis boost on 4% projects. We only have it on 9% projects. So the 4% is as it is stated in section 42. So we don't get to bump up the boost where it's not a DDA or a QCT for 4% projects, like we have the ability to do that on 9% projects. Okay, well, thank you everybody for your patience with all of this and sitting through the technical difficulties. This is the first time we've ever had a project that's had that many people, and we look forward to getting your applications.